Hello, welcome to Sound Off. I'm your host for the evening, John Blaschke, and every other evening, or Tuesday evenings. This is Sound Off by Soundview TV Community Media. It's your opportunity to be on TV. Give us a call in about the 15-minute mark in the show. We take call-ins and any other questions that we have. A very special guest for this evening, a long-awaited guest, none other than Mr. Gus Montanaro, the man that got me my start here.
Well, John, I got to tell you, it is a thrill being on your television show, and I'm very proud that watching you grow within this particular system. And what I want people to realize, when you're watching me, you're watching the past of public access television. When you're watching John, you're watching the future. It's where it's going. And I'm proud today that past is going to meet the future.
Thank you, Gus. That means a lot. And the future can mean you too at home. If you want to be on the show, get your foot in the door. We're here. Just come knocking.
Well, John asked me down this evening to more or less give you a little historic background of public access television, and of course,
because no one knows it better than him.
Well, I would say there aren't too many people alive,
besides like a lawyer maybe,
who's been involved with public access TV as long as me, okay? And I think I can do that. But I do want to mention that John and I collaborated on a project where we made a public service announcement concerning our television station. And so I think, John, why don't you lead into that, John?
All right. So it's we showed it on Gus's show Friday, actually. We're getting a little feedback. But we did show it on Gus's show on Friday. So if you tuned in Friday, you might have seen it. But it was done by none other than Ricky Mestri here in the studio. If we could roll that clip, please.
The advent of public access TV was the birth of social media. For over 30 years, you always had the opportunity to reach all your friends, neighbors, and relatives through public access TV. And now that we see how social media has grown into the major entity it has become, the importance of public access TV to maintain its position in reaching your community has grown exponentially. Public access TV was originally created to prevent cable carriers from controlling the free market of ideas, thought, or influencing the way we think. It gave the public an uncontrollable source of free speech. This was genius because it prevents exactly what the Facebook, Googles, and Twitters of the world are doing to their followers today. Public access is your community's last bastion of free speech. It's always been available to you to express whatever is important to you without fact-checking or censorship. Contact Soundview Community Media for any further information concerning your public access TV station.
So that was the commercial there. I think that our spokesman here did a great job.
I really had a lot of pleasure working on that project, and I enjoy that. And I see that PSA as some of the legacy that I will leave behind after the many years that I've been with public access TV. And John is going to give me the opportunity to tell you the story of how I got involved in public access TV. Yes, help me out. I am old, John. And that excuse always works whenever I screw up. I'm old. Okay.
Yeah, I got
but anyway, about my how I got involved in public access TV and some of my exploits and so let me just go right into that, John.
All right, sounds good to me.
Okay, for those of you who don't know my background, before I was involved in television, I had a political career. I did attempt to run for mayor in the city of Bridgeport a couple of times. I'd like to go into that story, but that's too long, and now we want to focus on TV. Mm-hmm. I did end up becoming a city councilman, and it's as a city councilman that I realized that the local media sources, which back, I was elected in 1989. Back then, we're basically just newspaper, a little bit on radio, but basically newspaper. And I would be at council meetings and I would see what it is that's going on in the city, with the city legislatively, and I could see what were we accomplishing, or
what wasn't being accomplished.
Or wasn't, in that case, wasn't being accomplished. Okay, that's a good way of putting it. And then I would read about it in the paper, and I would constantly say to myself, things like, what meeting was this writer at? What are they talking about? I mean, I was actually on the news-making end of the news, and then reading the news, I could see how the newspapers were falling short in telling people what was actually going on.
So believe it or not, they were as skewed back then as they are today.
They had an agenda. And of course, the biggest story was the reorganization under Chapter 9, where the newspaper convinced people that the city was going bankrupt. That's a whole nother story.
Right.
Okay, but I was deeply involved in that. That goes back to my political career, which I'm trying to avoid. But briefly, the whole concept of the city filing under Chapter 9, which Chapter 9 is the same thing as Chapter 11 for businesses, only Chapter 9's for cities and counties, was to reorganize your debt and stay in business. That's the purpose of Chapter 9. But the newspaper sold the narrative that we were trying to go bankrupt. Well, that scared everybody. Anyway, because of the misinformation that was going on in the newspaper at the time, I attempted to search out another venue to reach the people of Bridgeport, as a source of news. And I heard of this TV station at the time, which existed at the University of Bridgeport, which was the public access station for the Bridgeport metropolitan region. There was only Cablevision at the time, and the station covered 6 towns, which it still does in Cablevision, same 6 towns. But Bridgeport was the hub. Bridgeport was the biggest, I would say, customer of Cablevision of the 6 towns. So I eventually searched out and came across that television station, and went down there to the station to see what I can do to use the station to facilitate a more worthy interpretation of the news. That was my whole goal originally. Mm-hmm. Well, it turned out at the time the public access station. We're not taking calls yet, is that correct?
We're going to be taking calls in at the 15-minute mark.
Yes. So, at any rate, I go down to, I find the station. It's being operated out of the Student Center at the University of Bridgeport. The station manager at the time, his name was Ruben Abreu. And I meet with Mr. Abreu, and
you got your show.
Well, it didn't happen just like that. I got my show. But oddly enough, I was able to sell myself to the station that he chose to have me host the stations. This station now has Sound Off. Well, back then, the station had its own news magazine called Metro Line. It was on once a week, was on Wednesdays, it was an hour live show. Now, I'd never done television before. I got my feet wet in radio a little bit with a friend of mine called Dennis Dean, who was on DJZ at the time, but I never done any television, no history. But the station manager decides he wants me to host Metro Line, which I was taken aback at that particular decision because I had never done television. I wasn't even sure how comfortable I was going to be with it. In fact, I could tell you on my first few shows, I probably was obviously uncomfortable. But you know what? I always was a trooper, you know. And I guess I did well enough that not only did he maintain me as the host of the show, but he was, you know, after he saw that I could do this, the station gave me my own production. So my own initial production, and of course I'm still juggling being a city councilman at the same time. So my first production is a half-an-hour show called Bridging the Gap.
Very good play on words.
Thank you. It was a half-an-hour show, and I would have people on that were involved with Bridgeport politics. I had on other city council members. I had on Mary Moran, who was the mayor at the time, many times. I had on people who were state reps. In fact, my very first broadcast of Bridging the Gap, my guest was Councilman Christopher Caruso, which we're still good friends to this day, even though we were on different parties. Mm-hmm. And that was, and we have really, I would say, a very humorous friendship, because he didn't drive back in those days. So I would pick Chris up. Now, he was a Democrat and I was a Republican, okay? All right? So I'd pick him up. I would take him to the meeting, to the city council meeting. We'd be sitting across from each other at the city council meeting. We would fight each other. And then when the meeting was over, Chris, you need a ride home? Am I taking you home? What's going on? So we were always, before and after the meeting, we were always friends. And we're still friends to this day. And anyway, he was my very first guest on Bridging the Gap, on my very first show, and that aired in September of 1990.
Staying true to the actual title of the show, Bridging the Gap. You know, you're talking one of your close friends who's actually, on the other side of the aisle.
Right, and we were bridging the gap. Yeah, and there is a funny story about that because I picked up Chris at his house, and I'm driving him to UB. We're coming to the show together. This is a little off the path, but it's a very ironic story. So I'm driving down Iraniston Avenue as we're heading towards Seaside Park, and all of a sudden this cop stops us in the middle of the road, makes us stop.
He says, "I know you from TV."
No, not yet. That did happen, but not that day. Okay? So me and Chris were looking at each other. We can't figure out why this cop is stopping us. Well, it turns out, turning a corner and coming down Iriston towards us is somebody the cops are trying to catch, and they're using us to block the street so the guy don't get away.
So you were a hero that day.
Well, let's say reluctantly we were heroes that day. The cops used us to block traffic to catch somebody getting away from whatever. We didn't stick around to figure out all the facts. Okay, the guy couldn't get by us in the cop car, and he ended up having a cop car behind him, and they grabbed this guy. We were able, after all the fuss, we were able to leave, and we luckily got to the station on time for the show. But that's another. But that was, and that's my own production. And I can another real story real quick I want to tell about my first show. I was definitely nervous. This is my own show. It's the first one, and I was nervous. And I'm sitting on a set like I'm sitting with you right now. Sitting across from me is Chris Caruso, and he's never been on television.
Did you know you hadn't been on television either, really?
Well, no, I had hosted some Metro lines, okay. But now this is my show,
right?
My first production. Okay, it's all me, and so I'm nervous, and I see that Chris is nervous, and I'm sitting across and I'm saying, if I let Chris see that I'm nervous, he's going to fall apart. So I said, I got to suck it up. I got to make like I belong here. I got to look like I know what I'm doing. So I could
roll with the punches.
Right. So I mean, I had to show him that I was confident under this scenario to help build up his confidence, which really helped me in making a very professional presentation. And to this day, and unfortunately, most of my Bridging the Gap episodes are on 3/4-inch tape, which nobody has 3/4-inch decks. But I really did I put together a very nice video opening with a spectacular piece of music. If anybody's familiar with a band called Chase, the name of the tune I used was Open It Up Wide, which is all brass. And why would you use
Very classy.
Well, you used brass because what was Bridgeport? What was one of the biggest factories in Bridgeport?
You know better than I.
The brass shop.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
The brass shop was one of the biggest factories in the world. It covered like 2 different sides of town.
I didn't know that.
Well, the brass shop doesn't exist anymore, okay? But it was an enormous factory that ran on like North Washington to Washington Avenue. You know, it'd be on the east side and go all the way downtown. You know, it was a big factory, and Bridgeport was known for many years for the brass shop. The brass shop's probably been closed all your life.
So how exactly did you go from Bridging the Gap, having your own show there, and how did that affect how you viewed like free speech?
Oh, well, very good question, John.
Thanks.
Because that was the whole purpose of showing you the PSA, that I have always used this venue as a form of free speech, and I was always able to use my productions and other cases where I ended up on other productions to vent my own interpretation of the news, which gave me the opportunity to express free speech on this television station right here. Now, if you wanted to vent free speech in the newspaper, you have 2 ways of doing it. You could write a letter to the editor.
Or you could do an op-ed.
Okay? Well, first start out with a letter to the editor. Guess what? If the editor don't like your letter, it ain't going in there. That's it. Nah, this ain't good enough. Nah, we don't like what it's saying. But it's definitely.
This guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Whatever. However you want to interpret it, there is I won't say censorship, but they have.
There's a gatekeeper.
Right. Exactly. There is a gatekeeper. So you can't really use the newspaper. The only other way that you could guarantee that you could use a local newspaper for free speech is if you purchased advertising space, right, which people have done. When a political advertisement is basically could be interpreted as a form of free speech, but you have to purchase it. Okay, under those circumstances.
So it wasn't free; it was the cost of an ad.
Correct. And in my case, where I was a councilman, I could address a reporter from the Post and give them my opinion and give them my view, but it's there is no guarantees that
they're going to pick out parts of the quote.
And they're even going to make it sound, and on some cases, they're going to make it sound like something they want said and not what you actually meant. It's called taking something out of context. Right. And I had the most egregious event in taking something out of context happened to me at a town committee meeting, Republican town committee meeting, one year. I'm at a town committee meeting, and a member of the town committee suggests, this is the Republican Town Committee, made a suggestion that we not put up a candidate to run against Joe Ganim. So my retort was, well, if we don't put up a candidate, we might as well endorse him.
Right. Being sarcastic.
Yeah. In the newspaper the next day, it says, Gus Montanaro wants to endorse Joe Ganim.
They didn't like you. They must have had a vendetta.
I listen. Yes, I had my adversaries in the local newspaper, and remember, I was the originator of this is where I made most of my enemies. I was the originator, the original concept of going chapter 9 was my idea. I actually, in the month of February, put. Are we taking calls yet?
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, let me just ask them to hold on a second.
Can you hold on for a moment, please? You're on sound off.
I actually, in the month of February, submit a resolution to the city council for the city to apply for Chapter 9 to reorganize its debt. And basically what you wanted to do, and this is where I make all my enemies. Basically what you want to do is you want to open up all your union contracts and rewrite them to what you can afford.
The union people did not like that.
Oh.
I can see how.
And some of the things that I've witnessed was just unbelievable. Anyway, so that's where the anti-Gus Montanaro sentiment comes from. They made it very difficult for me to ever, and I don't want to go too deep into my political career. I want to stay in my TV career, and maybe someday we'll get a chance to go over that. Let's see what the caller has to say.
Hopefully this isn't one of those anti-Gus Montanaro.
That's okay. I can handle it. I've been doing it for years.
Hey, you're on sound off with Gus Montanaro and John Blash.
I'm not an anti-Gus Montanaro caller.
No, that's a very familiar friend of
earlier to tell you that your mics were screwed up, but now they're fixed.
I heard some ringing. Yeah, I was.
Yeah, that was me. Gus, when your arm got broken, was that political or was that TV?
Oh, I would say you're talking about when I got hit by a car.
Yeah.
That.
I don't know.
Okay. I don't like to bring that up too often, but I will tell that story.
There could still be some people listening.
Let me hang up and I'll talk to you.
Friday?
No, not this Friday.
They're on reruns this Friday. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
We're back in November.
I'll talk to you in November. Goodbye.
Bye, Cheryl. Thanks for
Okay. All right. Well, that's public access history.
Well, I mean, the story about your arm, I mean, that kind of involves public access, but
Yeah,
also
it definitely involves public access. Yes.
If you feel comfortable sharing it.
Well, what I don't want to do is I don't want it to happen again. But at any rate, I'm on TV on my show, and I think we were doing a show. The show that we did back then was called, as we segued from Bridging the Gap, which was a half-an-hour tape show. Metro, when the station moves to Fairfield, Metro line does not follow the station.
Is this when you went to Bridgeport's Open Forum?
That's when So what happens is when Fairfield takes over the station from UB, the people at Fairfield ask me if I would produce the live show.
So it's kind of like this a little bit. It's an open forum more so. More like guests to the public.
So we put an end to Bridging the Gap, and we went to a new format. It was an hour-long live show called Bridgeport's Open Forum. So this was an episode of Bridgeport's Open Forum. And what I do is I bring on two items I bring on television. I bring on a resolution that was submitted to the city council, which was an $1,100 budget transfer. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with a budget transfer, but when
Money's just being kind of shuffled
one
around.
agency is running out of money, and another city agency has a little surplus. You can move money from one agency to the other, but it has to be voted on by the council for that to happen. So it's called a budget transfer. So there's an $1,100 budget transfer that goes before the council. And the council is told that this is an $1,100 budget transfer. Vote on it as amended. So obviously nobody bothered to read the budget transfer or the amendment. Well, the amendment was for $960,000 worth of insurance policies. So I bring on TV the resolution, show everybody where the $960,000 amendment was hidden, and I bring on the minutes of the meeting to show who said what about it, and of course it was voted on unanimously. So I bring that on TV. That was on August the 10th. August the 16th, which is 6 days later, I'm dodging a black sedan. Coincidence? Could be.
Barely.
Doubt it, because
There was a big name involved with that
well,
budget transfer.
we're not going to go there.
Okay.
We're going to leave it where it is. Okay? Because I can't jump out of the way as fast as I could back then. Okay? So I was working. I was at work. Luckily, I was at work, and where I worked, we have two sides of the street, same operation. So I'm on the other side of the street. There was a truck parked in front of our place of business, and as I walk around the truck to cross the street, as I step in front of this truck, there literally was a car on me. I was very lucky that I jumped out of the way of the car. But my hand went up. I stopped, my hand went up, and the car hit my arm, and the back of my hand is now resting on my elbow. Broke my hand in half, my arm in half. Luckily, it didn't sever any of the flesh. Okay? And I'm telling you, this car literally came out of nowhere, and because of the speed this vehicle was traveling, I'm determining this was a professional driver. The car was meant for me. Now I get knocked to the ground. I pick up my arm and I run away because I'm saying, this job isn't done. This guy's going to come back and try and finish me off. That's the way I'm feeling. I'm running away.
And what was in the news then when you woke
Well,
up
that's
in
funny
the
you
hospital?
should say, okay? Because the question, now, I ended up being rushed to the hospital. I had emergency surgery. I wake up the next morning and I'm looking around. I'm going to see a newspaper. I'm figuring I got to be on the front page of the newspaper with this story.
City councilman running for re-election gets,
Well, actually, I wasn't a councilman at the time, but I was running as a city councilman because I had moved to a different district. Okay, but just because of who I am, I'm not an unknown commodity in Bridgeport. I mean, maybe people have 20 years later have forgotten me. But back then, I was,
30
those were the
channels, one of them
days.
was public
Yeah,
access.
yeah. Those were the days when people recognized me and people heard of me. Today, I've outgrown my notoriety. Anyway, so I'm looking. There's nothing in the paper. Maybe the police log. Nothing there. I watched it. I watched paper for days. It never made the paper. Never made the paper.
I thought it was in there as jaywalking.
No, it was never in the paper. And I'm saying, how did I not at least make the police log as a hit and run? I mean, this is clearly a hit and run. I get hit by a car. It ain't here anymore. That's a hit and run, no?
Yeah.
It never even makes it as a hit and run. And then later on I found out that the Stratford Police Department didn't record it as a hit and run. They had violated me for walking in traffic. So no one ever knew that. Are we off the air?
We might be.
Oh, okay.
We got a call.
All right. Hey.